Hello again, everybody. I'm Roger Hoover. Glad to welcome you back to the Crimson Tide Sports Network, and welcome to this Tuesday edition of Crimson Drive, driven by Tuscaloosa Toyota. Make sure you check them out, TuscaloosaToyota.com, and we're so thrilled to bring them on as our new presenting sponsor of Crimson Drive, and this show is live each Tuesday and Thursday at 2 p.m. Central across the Crimson Tide Sports Network. Let's go into today's headlines. Our friends at RJ Young provided us with this smart board, and RJ Young is the official technology solutions provider of Crimson Drive. They'll help us go through the headlines for today, and coming up on the show, first of all, we'll go back to last Saturday in College Station, Texas, as Alabama fell on the road to Texas A&M. 41-38 was the final score. We'll take you inside the booth for all the booth cam highlights of the A&M game, and then we'll have Coach's Checklist from Monday, hearing the big three things you need to know from Coach Saban's Monday press conference as he looked back a little bit to Texas A&M, but also gets you ready for what's coming up later this week against Mississippi State. We'll be doing the same thing. We have Writers Row, Joey Blackwell of Sports Illustrated and BamaCentral. He'll be along to break down the Texas A&M game. He was there covering it for BamaCentral, plus a few thoughts on what's ahead, not only for Crimson Tide football, but also basketball looming just around the corner as well. And then last but not least, our Alabama Legends interview will be with Bobby Humphrey. We talked before about the great games that he had in his Alabama career against Mississippi State in the 1980s, so great to catch up with one of our great Alabama legends in Bobby Humphrey. Some other headlines with the Alabama football team. Of course, the loss 41-38 for Alabama as Nick Saban was defeated by one of his former assistant coaches for the first time, Jimbo Fisher. He earns that distinction also as the first loss to an unranked team for Alabama in over 100 games as that historic streak comes to an end. And now the Crimson Tide 5-1 in the season, still 2-1 in the SEC play, still control their destiny in the SEC West, trying to get back to Atlanta for the SEC championship game. And in order to continue maintaining, controlling their destiny, they need to play well coming up Saturday night in Starkville against Mississippi State. 6 p.m. will be the kickoff. Our radio coverage across the network will start at 3 o'clock to get you ready for the Crimson Tide and the Bulldogs before Alabama's home next week for the homecoming matchup against Tennessee. And speaking of that Tennessee game, we know now when kickoff time will be, once again, 6 o'clock, as Alabama welcomes in Tennessee for what we call the third Saturday in October. This year it's on the fourth Saturday in October, but we'll let it slide. A great rivalry game coming up against the Vols in Tuscaloosa, and again scheduled for 6 o'clock. Alabama soccer team, home sweet home. Really great to see the wins that Wes Hart's team continue getting at home. Just over a week ago, knocked off 24th ranked LSU, and then this past Sunday, defeated Mississippi State. 1-0 was the final score as the South Carolina transfer Riley Tanner picks up the game-winning goal pretty late in the match in the 73rd minute. McKinley Crone, once again, a shutout for the Crimson Tide, was getting a lot of big saves against a very good Mississippi State team. So love the result for Wes Hart and the Alabama soccer team. Now Friday, they have a really tough task coming up, going to College Station to take on Texas A&M, a team that's been really up and down in the SEC, but this is still a co-champion in the league from last year. They were co-picked to win the league this year along with Arkansas. So Alabama against A&M coming up at 7 p.m. on the SEC Network Plus. Taking a look at some other headlines across Alabama athletics. Right now, the men's golf team is in action in Birmingham, playing in the Jerry Pate Invitational as the Crimson Tide fell on Sunday but had a couple of wins yesterday in match play against Florida and South Carolina. Now they're rounding out their play in the Jerry Pate Invitational today. The baseball team, yes, it's fall. Of course, this real season is in the spring, but fall baseball is becoming more and more popular. Same can be said for softball. We'll talk about in a minute. And if you're going to Starkville to watch Alabama against Mississippi State in football, make sure you watch the baseball scrimmage. It's coming up on Friday. We really love seeing that. It's just fun this time of the year to see some SEC baseball, so make your way to Duty Noble Field and enjoy Alabama Mississippi State coming up on Friday. The volleyball team fell to Kentucky 3-0 on Saturday, but still Kentucky, the reigning national champion, 5th-ranked team in the country, in Alabama, fought hard in every set against the Wildcats, so look forward to seeing the Crimson Tide volleyball team bounce back. And as I mentioned, fall softball is fully underway, and we saw at Lipscomb, Alabama split a Sunday doubleheader as Patrick Murphy's team is gearing up for what's going to be another special season coming up in the spring, beginning certainly some great experience playing in the fall. Well, it's time for our Tuesday edition again of Crimson Drive presented by Tuscaloosa Toyota. We just had our headlines presented by Roger Young, and now it's time to take a look back to Saturday night, Alabama falling for the first time since the 2019 Iron Bowl. Here's a look at all the booth cam highlights, and remember, you can watch the booth cam live presented by Royal Furniture for each and every Alabama football game. Here are the booth cam highlights from Texas A&M.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to College Station, Texas. It is an absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous day here today. Temperature 88 degrees, a nice breeze is blowing, not a cloud in the sky as the Alabama Crimson Tide gets set to meet the Texas A&M Aggies. We've got 7:07 to go in the opening quarter of play. We're live in College Station. Roydell Williams to the right side of his quarterback. 3 wides on the left. Bryce brings Williams in motion. He'll go to the right side. Protection. Bryce looks, throws left side. Nice lead. Williams out of the backfield. Dives into the end zone. Touchdown, Alabama. A 20-yard play. A beautiful lead pass by Bryce Young to his running back, Roydell Williams, coming out of the backfield. So Rashad Johnson looking at ahead. What do they do at halftime? What kind of adjustments do you make other than tell the guys, pay attention and concentrate?
Yeah, I think, like you said, it has to be a bigger, attention to detail. Guys have to communicate, and we have to just get more nastier up front. They're running the ball on us at their will, and they're stopping our run.
Weidermeyer, the tight end. A-Chain, the running back. Quarterback rolls right and throws. Intercepted, Alabama. Intercepted by the Crimson Tide. DeMarco Helms with his second interception of the year. It'll be a 37-yard try for Will Reichard. From this distance this year, he is 2 of 3. Kick is on the way. It is up, and it is good. So a 37-yard field goal by Will Reichard, cashing in on the interception by DeMarco Helms. Nick Constantino will punt it away for the second time tonight. JoJo Earl, the freshman from Alito, Texas, as it's blocked by Alabama and rolls into the end zone, covered by the Crimson Tide for a touchdown. Covered by Alabama. It was King Makuta who falls on top of the football, and Alabama gets the huge play they were looking for. 2nd down and 7. 2 wides left, 2 to the right, including Mechie and Latu. Quarterback comes up, he'll audible. Dalcourt looks back at him over his left shoulder. Resets. Here's the snap. Bryce looks far side behind the defense. Caught. Touchdown. Jamison Williams. A 22-yard try for Will Reichard. Remember, quarterback Paul Tyson is the holder. The snap from Nealon Hibbets. The spot and the kick are good, and it's a 1-point ball game from the 38-yard line. It'll be a 2nd and 5. Bryce waits, claps his hands, steps left, throws, caught. Jamison Williams, he makes the grab. He's loose to the 10. He carries people and finds running room down to the 7-yard line. A 34-yard play to Jamison Williams. And Alabama's knocking on the door to take their first lead since they were up 7-3 early in the first quarter. Here now is a 1st and goal from the 7, throw near side. Williamson makes the catch. He is in for a touchdown. Everybody's waiting. They're looking around. Did they hear a whistle? Did they see a flag? Jamison Williams was alone near side. Touchdown, Alabama. 3 wides on the left side. Bolden, Latu, Mechie, and now a 4th man, Robinson. Backfield is empty. Quick throw, far side, caught. 2-point conversion. What a great play. 2-point conversion. I don't know how Jamison Williams turned around and made that grab, but he did. And with exactly 5 minutes to go in the ball game, Alabama's up 38-31. And as time expires, Texas A&M defeats Alabama by a final score of 41-38.
Even though it was a loss, always love seeing the highlights from the booth cam presented by Royal Furniture. See all the fun you're missing if you're not watching the booth cam on our Facebook Live channel for each and every Alabama football game. Just shows you the passion our crew has for Crimson Tide football. The Eli Gold calling the play-by-play, of course, with John Parker Wilson, Rashad Johnson, and Chris Stewart hosting. Again, that's live each Alabama football game day, starting with our 3 hours of pregame coverage, in which this week will begin at 3 o'clock, getting ready for the 6 p.m. kickoff in Starkville against Mississippi State. Well, after the loss against Texas A&M, now we're really getting focused on what's ahead for the Crimson Tide with the Bulldogs later in the week. And Coach Saban always starts the week with a Monday press conference. And here are the highlights from that press conference as we give you Coach's checklist for Monday.
Yeah, well, I think the key thing is for everybody in the organization, our players, coaches, to respond, the right way to the things that we need to fix. We have to be technical in the way we approach the players and how we can fix it. And, they have to be receptive and trying to do things and pay attention to detail and do things the right way and understand how that's going to affect their performance, when the game comes. So, that's our number one, goal and objective, for today. Mississippi State is really a much improved team. They're playing really well right now. Their offense is like, one of the top 5 in the country in terms of pass offense. They throw the ball, 56, 57 times a game. So this is going to be a real challenge, for our defense. Their defense is very good at stopping the run. They're like 3rd in the SEC overall. They're very aggressive in the way they play. The players are really playing well together. So, they play a little different kind of front, 3-3 stack type thing, which, creates some, preparation, things that we need to do a good job on. They've got really good skilled players on offense. They've got a couple of receivers that have been very productive. Will Rogers has played really well. For them, he's very accurate with the ball. He understands the offense. He's been very consistent in the way he's played, throughout the season. I think they can run the ball a little bit better than they could a year ago. So, that's a challenge when you throw it as much as they do. And they're very aggressive and good on special teams, even though their kicker is been injured. I don't know if he'll continue to be injured. But it kind of is a challenge all the way around. I think the big thing for us is, we got to take care of our business, correct our things, do the things that we need to do to be able to play, the way, we want to play. So, and there's obviously some things that we need to do better. Well, we didn't run a very good route, on the one that he threw. But I thought he stayed focused, didn't get upset, and, played, well in the game under the circumstances. I think we handled the noise better. I think his reads were pretty good for the most part. Nobody's perfect when it comes to accuracy, but I thought he did a pretty good job in that regard. So I thought he kept his poise and really stayed focused on the next play, and I didn't think that affected him.
So that was Coach Saban with Coach's Checklist for Monday. He next will be meeting with the media coming up on Wednesday night after Alabama's Wednesday afternoon practice, and we'll have Coach's Checklist from Wednesday on the next edition of Crimson Drive presented by Tuscaloosa Toyota coming up on Thursday afternoon at 2 p.m. Central. But yesterday, Coach Saban talking a little bit about the last game against Texas A&M, but starting to look forward to the upcoming game against Mississippi State, and that's the same for this Writers Row conversation, as we're pleased to be joined by Joey Blackwell of Sports Illustrated and BamaCentral. We were joined a couple weeks ago by Katie Wyndham of that site and gave us some great insight on the Crimson Tide. Same could be said today for Joey Blackwell, who made the trip to College Station, really has a good feel for what this Crimson Tide football team is going through this season. So we figured it's a good time to catch up on Writers Row with Joey Blackwell. Joey, it's great to see you. How's everything going?
Doing all right, Roger. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to taking a dive into Alabama football today.
Well, you get to be the first we talk to after a loss on this show as the Crimson Tide fell in College Station on Saturday. Just what were your big takeaways from Saturday night at Kyle Field?
Big takeaways. I mean, it's been a kind of a narrative since the Florida game that Alabama, of course, struggles with large crowds. At least this team in particular does, and that was another narrative that came out this weekend. Another narrative talking about, Nick Saban has questioned leadership on the team. He's repeatedly talked about it several times, and needing players to step up when they're needed. We did see some players step up in the third quarter. The third quarter was really textbook Alabama football. I mean, the offense had 160 yards compared to Texas A&M's 10, and that also speaks a lot to Alabama's defense. But unfortunately, for the other three quarters, it didn't really look like Alabama football. There were a lot of also, missed calls on both sides of the football regarding, from the offensive defensive coordinators, just looked like they were a little rattled out there. So just as far as initial takeaways, players need to step up. But the fortunate thing is, as we'll probably talk about here in a little bit, Nick Saban did speak a little bit about how some players stood up in the locker room afterwards. So looking forward to seeing how that's implemented against a Mississippi State team that's really just a few plays away from being 5-0.
That's very true, and that's a team that was able to go to Kyle Field and pick up a win a couple weeks ago. Let's talk about quarterback Bryce Young for just a moment. You mentioned Alabama, tough time on the road at Florida. It looked like Bryce, for the most part, handled things well that day in Gainesville. What did you see out of him in College Station?
I mean, it was just as consistent as always. I mean, there was a lot of drop passes, but that's not his fault. He had one of his, less impressive games statistically, but he still was able to throw for 369 yards and 3 touchdowns. When you get inside there were those, those incompletions inside, the red zone inside the 10-yard line late in the game. But once again, a couple of those were drops, and you're typically supposed to run it in those situations. So I'm not sure if he really knew what was going on there, but I overall, I was relatively, still impressed by him. And in my opinion, he still is the Heisman front runner. He even with a lot of pressure on him because the offensive line struggled throughout the Texas A&M game. He was sacked, of course, 4 times, but he was still able to avoid being sacked more often than that and still able to escape the pocket and make some great downfield passes. So overall, still positive outlook from him. Looking to see how he bounces back against Mississippi State this week, though.
On the defensive side of the ball, Malachi Moore goes out very early in the ball game. What effect do you feel like that had on the Crimson Tide after he got ejected for targeting?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest effects from that was leadership. Like, we kind of talked about earlier about how there's been in the defense particularly has been in lack of leadership this year. There's also been poor communication. That's something that anytime you talk to an Alabama defender, that's one of the things that they try to emphasize every week is better communication. And with Malachi Moore, who's one of the top-ranked veterans on the defense, having him out, early on, I think really set a tone for poor communication on defense. He didn't have it, and I actually just finished watching the game film a few moments ago, and one of the things that I saw consistently was the defensive backfield not being able to point out their man, not being able to cover their zone properly, because I think they weren't quite sure what zone they were assigned on particular plays because Moore is out. So I think having that lack of leadership in the backfield really hurt Alabama in the long run.
Yesterday, of course, the media was able to speak to a couple of players, Brian Robinson Jr., and then especially Will Anderson. I tweeted out a clip of just some of his answers because it really speaks to the kind of leader he's trying to be. Just what'd you make of his comments yesterday?
One of the things he talked about after the Florida game, hate to go back there again, but one of the things he talked about was how he needed players to step up. And one of the things he said yesterday was that he assumed they didn't take his message seriously after the Texas A&M game. Will Anderson, despite him being just a sophomore, is one of the biggest leaders on the team. He's also one of the best performers. But he talked yesterday. I'm sorry, I'm pulling up his quote right now. One of the things that he discussed was, talking about how they need to bounce back after this loss. And, he said one of the biggest things that he keeps preaching is that they need to come together as a unit. They need to all, come together, which is something they haven't really done yet. I mean, they've made big plays on defense, but being together is something they struggle with. So seeing that type of leadership from such a young player on defense is definitely encouraging.
Well, it's going to be important for the defense coming up in Starkville, coming together against the air raid offense. We saw last year, even though Mississippi State had some good games prior to the Alabama game, the Crimson Tide had a dominant performance in that outing. But how do you feel like this group is ready to face a Mike Leach offense once again is rolling heading into this game?
Well, fortunately, they'll have Malachi Moore back, and that's a start. They'll hopefully also have some injured players back, so that should be beneficial. One of the things that Alabama struggled with, though, the past couple of weeks has been the running game, which is something, fortunately, for the Crimson Tide that Mississippi State is not exactly adept to. I mean, Mike Leach is known for his air raid offenses, and they do have a very strong passing offense. But fortunately, Alabama's been able to do a relatively decent job. They did, of course, struggle against Zach Calzada and Texas A&M, but prior to that game, they did really well. I mean, we saw what they were able to do against Ole Miss. So I'm thinking that it's really an optimistic situation for Alabama, especially now that they have, they're playing, they're kind of picking their own destiny right now, and they have full control of what they're doing. So I see this as a fortunate circumstance for Alabama being able to go to a team that's kind of one-dimensional. Now, they do have an okay rushing attack, but at the same time, I pictured that the Alabama defensive line will be blitzing a lot. They'll also be playing a lot of zone, and I think they're going to be just fine.
What are some more other storylines you're keeping an eye on as we get ready for Saturday?
Storylines, once again, of course, it's Mike Leach versus Saban. It's going to be a good game. I think one of the biggest things for me that I'm interested to see is how Alabama responds to another tough road environment. We talked about that at the beginning of this segment, talking about how they struggled at Florida. Obviously, they struggled at Texas A&M. I want to see how they can do in a smaller crowd at Starkville, but albeit a very loud crowd at Starkville. I want to see how they deal with that. I want to see how Bryce Young bounces back after having, while on paper a solid day, bouncing back from his first loss as a starter. I'm also wanting to see how a lot of the defensive players respond after their, a lot of them, it's their first loss between the freshmen and the sophomores. So I think the storylines are, wanting to see how Will Anderson responds. So he had a great day, but I'm really wanting to see how Christian Harris and Henry To'oTo'o pick up the slack after these past several weeks and responding to the loud environment.
Well, of course, you cover Alabama football for BamaCentral and Sports Illustrated, but you also cover men's basketball, and we got to meet with Coach Oates last week as practice is fully underway at Coleman Coliseum. Are you excited that basketball time is almost back in Alabama?
Absolutely. A basketball season is one of my favorite sports to cover, and I'm really looking forward to it. What Nate Oates has done in such a short time in Coleman Coliseum and in Tuscaloosa is nothing short of impressive. Looking forward to seeing what he can do this year, especially with, another just really talented recruiting class that he's brought in. They do have some injury struggles they're going to have to iron out over the next few months, including Damari Burnett, who will be out for the year, but really excited to cover basketball this year and seeing where they take them. Sweet 16 last year, maybe they'll go further. We'll just have to wait and see.
It's certainly exciting. Of course, you cover Alabama for Sports Illustrated and BamaCentral. What can you tell us about the coverage you guys provide? A large team that you have of writers as well to work with, photographers, illustrations even. I mean, you guys cover it all.
Yeah, absolutely. BamaCentral, we're Sports Illustrated, Alabama affiliate site. We cover everything. Right now, of course, it's football season. We also have a soccer writer covering Alabama soccer team. We have dedicated writers for almost every sport. And of course, when football comes around, it's all hands on deck. The same with basketball. But we have people at almost every game. We have people at every football and every basketball game. And looking forward to doing that. We have, of course, we have daily cover stories that, break down a lot of football, but also once other sports seasons, gear up, talk about them. And we also have, of course, a daily column that people can look out for, but founded by Christopher Walsh, then me, myself, we have Katie Wyndham, Harrison Holland, Edwin Stanton, just a really great staff of writers. And we really like to put our best foot forward and put out as much content as we can just to make Alabama fans happy.
Well, we certainly appreciate it when we're getting ready for Alabama games. You guys certainly do great work. And Joey, we just thank you so much for today coming on the Crimson Tide Sports Network, giving us some thoughts on the Crimson Tide. All the best to you, and we'll see you down the road. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Appreciate it.
Really enjoyed catching up with Joey Blackwell, getting his thoughts on the Crimson Tide as Alabama looks to move forward for Saturday's showdown with Mississippi State in Starkville, and somebody that through the years has always played well for the Crimson Tide against Mississippi State. If you go back to the 1980s, there was nobody better than running back Bobby Humphrey, and we had a chance to catch up with him, talking about his experience playing against Mississippi State and some of the great moments he's had in his career. So I think you'll enjoy this conversation with Crimson Tide legend Bobby Humphrey. As we get ready for Saturday's game between Alabama and Mississippi State, we take a step back in time, look back to the history of this series. And when you look back at the history of this series between the Crimson Tide and the Bulldogs, really one name stands out above the rest, and that name is Bobby Humphrey, a star running back for the Crimson Tide in the 1980s. And he joins us now over the phone. Bobby, roll Tide. How's everything going?
Man, roll Tide, and everything's going great. Everything's going great.
Does it bring back some good memories just hearing about Alabama against Mississippi State, because you had some really good games against the Bulldogs?
Man, I had some really good games when I was at Alabama against the Bulldogs. I can remember very vividly, not the 284-yard game, but the game in which I set the record for rushing yards and had the opportunity to meet Johnny Musso, who somebody I idoled. And I kind of followed during his career at Alabama, and we ended up becoming close friends. And I can remember him being in the locker room and speaking. And, after that ball game, it was a tough ball game, believe it or not. And it went all the way down to the wire, and it took a last minute score to actually put the game on ice there at Legion Field at the time, and back in 1987. So. Yeah, it brings back a lot of memories when you're talking about Mississippi State versus Alabama.
Yeah, let's go back to 1986 and that record-breaking performance. I mean, you had 284 yards rushing in that ball game. Just what do you remember about that day, and also were you tired? I mean, that's a lot of running.
Oh, it was just an awesome night. Everything was clicking that game. The offense was going very well. The defense was playing well. The offensive line and they were opening up holes and paving the way, and man, I just was somewhat in a really, really good groove, man. I felt good. It was, it was just everything was just clicking. It's one of those games when everything just lined up, everything just lined up perfect, and the only thing you got to do is just hit the hole and run, and a lot of things worked out. And when the day was over with, I was about at 284 yards, which I didn't even realize that I had ran the ball, had ran for that many yards. But it was a great victory. The team played well. It was really, really a good way of kind of rejuvenating ourselves from a big time loss the week before at home against Penn State. So that was a big ball game for us. I never will forget that one.
You mentioned the game the next year on Halloween night between Alabama and Mississippi State, and you also talked about the fact that Johnny Musso was there and you became the record holder that night. I'm sure that was very special, especially the culmination of a dream, because you always wanted to play at Alabama, and now you become the all-time leading rusher. That had to be really special for you.
That was a really, really good night. Yeah, having the opportunity to meet Johnny Musso was historic within itself, man. It's just a dream come true. That was a night where, we weren't really playing our best football, but we just I should say we weren't playing our best football. I think Mississippi State was just playing off the charts. They were playing extremely well. And they had a great game plan together, and they really just took us all the way down to the wire. And we were able to just pull that thing out right there at the end. Now, one of the things I did have in that ball game was my longest actually touchdown run, which was I think maybe about like 85 yards or 80 yards, something like that. And but I tell you, now you're talking about a ball game where I really got tired. I got a little windy in that game because that 84-yard run was early in the ball game, man, and I had to go right over there to the sideline and get immediately.
I bet. Certainly a good memory from that. And Bobby, when you look back at your Alabama career overall, what are you most proud of?
The thing I'm most proud of my Alabama career, man, is how we accomplished so many things as a team. You think about what we did up under Perkins, with playing in that '86 season and things we accomplished. You think about that ball game, that season. We played out of conference, Penn State, Ohio State, Notre Dame, and Texas A&M. You're talking about big time ball games. Them big time ball games you had to play against really, really big powerhouse teams. And then we cap it off with a Sun Bowl victory over Washington, which at the time Washington was the Pac-12 champs at that time. They had a really, really good football team. And you think about those kind of seasons, and it make you really, really feel proud and appreciative of what you was able to accomplish back in '86. And with all of the things that happened, in terms of adversity that we had to overcome off the field, like Willie Wiles passing and George Scruggs, who was also in that '85 freshman class that I came in with. And you go back and you look at those things and you say, man, we overcame a lot that '86 season. And those are the things I feel most proud of, is how we came together as a team and really just had each other back.
You certainly did. And speaking of being proud, of course, we all got to watch you play at Alabama wearing the number 26, but then we got to see your son, Marlon, play for the University of Alabama wearing the number 26 as well. And now we call him All-Pro Marlo with what he's doing in the NFL with the Baltimore Ravens. You got to be tremendously proud of that young man.
Oh, yes. He's done extremely well and is playing well. He's having a great year this year. It was just so pleasant to be able to go back and as an alumni and a former player and watch him run up and down the field in that same 26 jersey I wore when I was there. And boy, it's something to behold. And now he's kind of fulfilled the dream that he's always had of playing in the National Football League, and he's having that opportunity, and he's doing well. So it's something definitely Dad is kind of sticking his chest out and beating his chest and singing praises and thankful for what God has allowed him to accomplish. It's a proud moment for me.
Well, Bobby, just thank you so much for joining us today, giving us some great memories on Alabama and Mississippi State through the years. Just all the best to you, and thank you for joining us today. Roll Tide.
Thank you, and Roll Tide.
Big thanks to Bobby Humphrey for joining us here on the Crimson Tide Sports Network, giving us great memories of Alabama and Mississippi State through the years. And now the next chapter in this rivalry will be written coming up on Saturday night, 6 o'clock, Alabama against Mississippi State. Our coverage on the radio will start at 3 o'clock. But before that, we'll have a lot of content for you here on the Crimson Tide Sports Network, getting you ready for that ball game. First of all, we will have Crimson Drive presented by Tuscaloosa Toyota headed your way at 2 p.m. on Thursdays. Again, we'll have Coach's Checklist from Wednesday. We'll also be visiting with the voice of the Mississippi State Bulldogs, Neil Price, Aaron Suttles of The Athletic, as well as Eli Gold. He'll be giving us a Hey Coach preview and head coach Nick Saban show preview for Thursday night, 6:30 at Baumhauer's Victory Grill. We'll have that. We'll have This Week on the Crimson Tide Sports Network presented by GoPuff. So many things between now and Saturday to help get you ready for Alabama against Mississippi State. Certainly want to say thank you to the guests that we had today, Bobby Humphrey as well as Joey Blackwell of BamaCentral. Thanks as well to Ethan Carabin, our producer, for putting the show together. And thank you as well to Tuscaloosa Toyota. Check them out online, TuscaloosaToyota.com. We're proud that Crimson Drive is now driven by Tuscaloosa Toyota. For everybody at the Crimson Tide Sports Network, this is Roger Hoover saying good afternoon, Roll Tide. Thank you so much for watching the Crimson Tide Sports Network.